Hello everybody, thank you for being here with us. We're very happy to host you today in this 10th edition of the ChileDay London. ChileDay London is an instance that is held thanks to the organization of a private-public alliance between InBest Chile and the Minister of Finance in Chile. We are very thankful as well to our sponsors who allow us to do this meeting today. Today we will be talking about green finance with a panel that needs no introduction. However, they will be introducing themselves and will be talking briefly to us about some impressions they have on the topic of green finance. We will have as well the pleasure to make them some questions after their individual expositions. So today we are here with Claudio Muñoz. Thank you, Claudio, for being here with us. Bernardita Piedrabuena, thank you, Bernardita. Cristóbal Torres, thank you, Cristóbal. Jennifer Wu, who is sharing with us through Zoom, thanks to the technology, and as well Fiona Calder through the same devices. So thank you, everybody, for being here with us. And if you all join me, let's hear Claudio that's going to speak to us about how is it that we can transform ourselves with this new green finance. Claudio.
Well, thank you very much, Macarena, and thanks for the invitation to this panel of ChileDay. I think, Macarena, that maybe today, any business activity should be or should have a strategy around sustainable business. And that is the opportunity. And I expect to discuss in this panel, why is this important for the business community? Why this is important for the adoption of our strategy? And how this is important for the world, due to we're facing a very significant climate change. Thanks for inviting me to this panel.
Thank you, Claudio. Claudio, I don't know if you want to make the rest of your speech now?
I don't know if you want an introduction and some Q&A or whatever.
Okay, we'll go to the Q&A afterwards. Bernardita, what about the new regulation for Chile?
Well, thank you, Macarena. Thank you for ChileDay to invite me to this occasion. As you said, the CMF has just published a new norm that will require two different issuers and banks and insurance company to publish non-financial information related to ESG subject. In this sense, to have more information for investors will allow them to know what are the risks that they are taking when they invest in some companies, and they will aware about those risks. At the same time, this new norm will be applied there will be a transition period to fulfill this norm. This is going to start in 2003 for the information in 2022, and we'll finish with the smallest firms in 2025. We think that this new norm will help to support green financial finance and help to support firms that are friendly with the environment.
Thank you, Bernardita. Thanks a lot. Cristóbal, what about the perspective of institutional investors?
Thank you for the invitation, Macarena. Thank you to InBest. In October 2019, we signed the Principle of Responsible Investments, and from the 7 pension funds that we have in Chile, only 4 out of those 7 have already signed. And there are other 8 large institutional managers that have already signed the PRI. I think that's the first step that as an industry we have committed, and I think it has been a very good tool in order to organize the different procedures and processes that we have about ESG. The PRI has given us a roadmap in order to advance in how to position our portfolio, understanding what are the metrics that we need to look at, and how to include in our investment processes ESG factors. So I think we are going in the right direction, but it's a process that we are just starting right now.
Thank you, Cristóbal. So Jennifer, could you share about us, what are the new opportunities for investors now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. So I think over the last few years, there's been a lot better appreciation, if you like, for how environmental, social, and governance, so ESG issues, are presenting new types of risks and opportunities for companies, right? So sustainability, if you think about it, is really around the creation of long-term prosperity for all. It is really the key to steady and long-term financial return. So as investors, we've always been focusing on governance, or the G of ESG, but ESG is more than just that. Now we know that how a company manages its human capital actually has a direct impact on productivity as well as operational efficiency. Poor practices such as labor issues in the supply chain could actually result in reputational damage, and that could lead to a loss of business or bankruptcy even. So if we think about the E, S, and G, the S is really about people, how well a company is managing its talent, employees, customers, stakeholders, so on and so forth. And we want to be able to really lean into companies that are doing a better job in taking care of their customers. And finally, I think another big area of opportunity as well as risks is climate change. We can't talk about ESG without talking about climate change. I think it's really important to really focus on not just the risk side of climate change, but also as a result of transition to a low carbon economy, there are a lot of different kind of opportunities, right? So we've heard a lot about technologies such as electric vehicles, battery storage, renewable energies, but that's not really all. I think the exciting part is to look across the entire supply chain. Who are the companies that are manufacturing equipment and parts for, say, wind turbine? And then also, which companies in the agriculture sector will benefit as a result of us being more precise with, say, fertilizer usage, better water efficiency and consumption, for example. So in a nutshell, I think ESG brings lots of new ways of looking at risks, but also new and exciting investment opportunities. And we want to make sure that across E, S, and G, we're looking at the full spectrum when we analyze companies, just like how we've been evaluating different investment opportunities. And that's why, I think this now, as an investor, is really the time to act and invest more sustainably.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. Thanks a lot for that. And Fiona, could you please introduce us? What are you thinking about the opportunities in this new green and changing world?
Thank you very much, Macarena, and thank you also to InBest for the invitation to participate on this panel. I've been involved in ChileDay for all 10 editions of ChileDay London, and really seen this initiative go strength to strength. And I think it's even more important in today's changing world. So I've just come from COP26. I'm the regional ambassador for Latin America and the Caribbean for COP26. So I've just come from the UN's big climate change conference in Glasgow. And why is that important? And what sort of opportunities does it mean for business and investors? So the COP26 conference, which of course built on the work done in COP25 by Chile, has been very, very important. And we agreed something called the Glasgow Climate Pact across all parties. So that's 197 countries involved in that process. And what was that all about? It was about global agreement to accelerate action on climate change this decade to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees, which is so important because that mitigates against the potential catastrophic consequences from climate change. And also what was called the Paris Agreement, elements of that were finalised, which is the international framework by which all this can move forward. So why is that important? What does it mean for business and investment? Climate change is happening. That is absolutely clear. Also, sadly, across Latin America, we've seen the terrible pandemic and the longer-term social and economic impacts of that. We've also seen so far relatively little investment in a green recovery, and yet this is a great opportunity for the region. Chile is leading the way on making sure that the recovery is sustainable, but that needs to happen across the whole region. And it's important because, for example, here in Latin America, both investment in the short term and longer term recovery is way behind global average. So not only is there a risk in terms of dealing with the immediate impacts, there's a risk of future loss competitivity with other parts of the world, and the region will fall even further behind. So that's the kind of bad news, and further bad news is also the vulnerability of Latin America to climate change, one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. But all those difficulties also create major opportunity for business and investment. In the transition to net zero, so in moving towards more use of renewable energies, in looking at new energy sources, for example, all the great work that's happening in Chile on hydrogen energy. There's also potential in decarbonising sectors, for example, particularly transport, moving to green, clean emission vehicles. And then there's the whole transition around adaptation and resilience, for example, investments in sustainable infrastructure, looking at that in terms of whole life planning of assets. And then it's also about looking at opportunities on nature-based solutions, particularly in the forestry and agricultural sectors. So there are many, many opportunities here, and it's both around those green investment opportunities, but it's also around in financing green, about how we accelerate finance and investment in this sector. And it's about the opportunities that come from new financial services, from data and analytics, and from new financial instruments. So this is both the threat of a generation, but it's also the opportunity of a generation, and one I hope in which people participating in ChileDay will focus on as the opportunity of the future. Thanks very much. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Fiona. Thank you for that. And maybe we could go into details now. So Claudio, at the end of the day, this can get in only good intentions. So in practice, what are Chilean companies doing? You're the president of Aguas Andinas. What is your company doing in this regards?
Well, as I said earlier, Macarena, today any business activity would be unthinkable without a very clear and robust sustainability strategy. And I think that Chilean companies are doing changes in this area. My opinion is we should go faster. We should accelerate our transformation. And at the end, and I agree with what Fiona was saying, this is an opportunity to share with society, to share with the community what we know to do. Basically, companies know how to transform ourselves. And climate change and the challenges that we have, especially in Chile, are an opportunity. And let me go to your question. In Aguas Andinas, we did a change in our mind. And let me explain why this is important. Maybe in a city like Santiago, the perfect example of waste is the sewage. The residual water of any city is the perfect example of waste. Our change in mind, our change in strategy was to transform waste into value. And due to significant investment, more than $3 billion in the last 20 years, we were able to transform that process. And today, and we are very proud, and Chile is proud of this. This is not only a success of Aguas Andinas, this is a success of the country, of the city. 100% of the residual water in Santiago are treated. That means that we are giving to the water a new life. And that is the reaction, and that is the opportunity behind climate change. Now we can think in a real terms about reuse water. Now we think to face what is happening with climate in areas, metropolitan region, with this kind of investment. And that is, in my opinion, the perfect example how it's possible to rethink strategies, how it's possible to rethink business process, how it's possible to use green finance to support the significant projects for the city and for the people, especially under this climate change.
Thank you, Claudio. Thank you. Bernardita, so how is it that the regulator is seeing this? There's always the risk that this is a thing amongst private people and that really the regulator is not being able to catch up. So are you including climate change in your supervision somehow in the micro or in the macro way of seeing things?
Yes, Macarena. We have been thinking about climate change and their impact in our audited institutions from many points of view. The first one is the norm that I mentioned. This new norm is going to require non-financial information for all the issuers of public offerings, securities, also for banks, insurance companies, and other firms. This norm is based on the best international standard, the Global Reported Initiative, and also in terms of the climate change indicators. It's based on SASB, and SASB is a standard that has a risk matrix with different indicators for 77 industry, and those indicators has to be informed depending on the industry where your firm belong. So this is one part of the answer, and the other thing that we are doing is analyzing how the climate change will impact the asset under management of banks, insurance companies, principally, because we are concerned about the prudential issues that climate change could have on those assets. So we are starting a process trying to understand, studying. In particular, we are receiving some capacity from university and think tanks, and we are doing a stress test in order to quantify the impact of the climate change, physical and transition risk on those assets, how to deal with these risks in order that the institutions, banks and insurance companies continue to be solvent after those shocks. So we have a big agenda, a huge agenda in order to include those aspects of climate change in processing the CMF.
Thank you, Bernardita. Thank you. Jennifer, and why don't you illustrate us a bit? We would very much like to know how this is seen by foreign investors. How is it that JP Morgan is including ESG in their process of investment? What has been the process you have been following, the path you have traveled?
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, I think if you think about the spectrum of ESG, G is definitely, and if you talk to any asset owners or asset managers, governance risks have always been incorporated in the way we manage portfolios and analyzing companies. But I think what's really changed is that given the amount of information we now have on companies' environmental and social practices, we're able to actually assess more holistically across the full spectrum. So with that in a backdrop, starting in 2016 within JP Morgan, what we have done is a group of investors got together and really looked at what available E and S data can we buy from the market, can we get from companies. And then we really grew over time up until 2019. We felt like there is enough data available for us to do more systematic integration. And then also different investment teams across equity, fixed income, alternatives have also experimented different ways of integrating ESG. We wanted to make sure that there is a framework that is consistent across our entire investment platform and that can be repeatable. So we really broke it down into 3 stages. So in 2016, all the investment teams committed to start integrating ESG consideration into their investment processes. And we went through a period of what we call implementation. And in 2020, what we have done is the final stage called demonstrate. So commit, implement, and demonstrate. What we have done is to really evaluate all the different actively managed investment teams to see how they are actually integrating ESG in their research process. So that means how does their research analyst look at ESG? What data do they have? How do they analyze that? And is that part of the evaluation formula, if you like, so credit rating or market valuation? All the way to how a portfolio manager then assess that based on the findings from the analyst. Does that impact the portfolio manager's way of constructing the portfolio, and how is that happening? And then also post-investment, what kind of engagement work and dialogue do we have with companies if we don't think their ESG performance is good enough? And then ultimately, how is it tracked and documented as part of our day-to-day business as usual investment risk monitoring processes? So, we basically look at the whole cycle of investment and wanted to understand how is ESG information used in every part of that cycle? Because for us, like I mentioned earlier, there's just much better appreciation of how ESG factors do impact performance. And in some cases, it's shorter term, near term, in some cases, much longer term. So it's really, really important for us to know that every investor within JP Morgan Asset Management have access to the best available ESG data, and then also have the tools and technology that allow them to use the data to make investment decisions on a daily basis.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. Maybe we can go now to ask Cristóbal. So Cristóbal, we were hearing Jennifer with JP Morgan talk us about how are things done abroad for private investors. Are we up to date now in local investors, or we're a bit delayed? Do we surf the same wave?
Well, first, it's great to hear what Jennifer is telling us and all the journey that they have gone through. We are a little bit delayed compared to what she mentioned, but we are going in the same direction, and that makes me very comfortable that we are going in the right direction also. As she mentioned, institutional investors through the years have been very focused on the G, on government and corporate governance, and being very aware of protecting our minority stakes and being sure that the company is worried about labor rights and composition of the board of directors, gender parity, and that kind of thing. It's something that we've been working for many years. But the question is, how do we incorporate the E and the S into our investment processes? And we've been able to do that for our international portion of our portfolio, because nowadays we can access, just as you have a credit rating from an agency for a bond or for a company, now we have ESG ratings that we can access worldwide. So that has given us very good information to include in our investment processes. The problem we have had is with Chilean companies, because the information that we have is not as good as the international one. So what Bernardita just announced is a breakthrough for us. It's great news, really. I read it's a very long document. I went through that, and it's very complete. They did a very good job incorporating best practices around the world. And I think that we should have access to standardized information, comparable information, and reliable information, which is key in order to make comparisons and good investments. Now, we all know that the devil is on the details, and we'll see, Bernardita mentioned this is a transition, so we'll see how good is the quality of information that we start receiving from corporates. And of course, this is a work in progress, and we're here to make every contribution in order to improve the process, because it's key for our investment process. So we're very happy with this new regulation, and happy to hear what Jennifer mentioned, because I think we are heading in the same direction at least.
Awesome to hear. Thank you, Cristóbal. Cannot help but ask now to Fiona. Fiona, we're hearing this. We're hearing about companies doing things, regulators doing things, foreign and local investors in our case. What about COP26? Is COP26 relevant to us? Are they talking something that is practical to people and communities, or is it just very, very high level, not really down on where we live normally?
Macarena, I think that's a very good question. And fundamentally, COP26 is about people and in the world. Macarena, there is a little bit of sound, so I just want to check you can hear me okay.
Okay, maybe you could just speak again to see whether we have a good signal for you.
Okay, so I think, Macarena, your question is a very, very good one. So ultimately, COP26 is about people, and it's about the huge changes facing our world. So what did we see in Glasgow? We saw 120 world leaders come to Glasgow. We saw 197 countries agree the Glasgow Climate Pact. That's very significant. That is the biggest meeting of world leaders since the UN was set up at the end of the Second World War. And this is because climate change is happening in our world. And I often feel that we talk about climate change, we talk about protecting the planet, all of that's very important. But at the heart of this are people, people's quality of life, people's livelihoods, and ultimately people's lives. And that's particularly true in Latin America, this very vulnerable region in the world. And so what we've seen is countries come together to agree that action needs to be taken, and action needs to be taken urgently in the next decade to reduce emissions, but also crucially to build in the measures to adapt to climate change and build in future resilience. And that's going to affect everybody across the world. And it's very important that both governments plan for that, but also that businesses plan for it. And some of the other panel members have been talking also about the transparency of information and the role of regulation. And that's really, really important. It's where every business, whether large or small, needs to assess its portfolio, its assets, its products, its services in terms of climate risk, but also climate opportunity. And why has ESG really come to the fore in recent years to be the top of every board's agenda? That has to be, it's not just about for the company's internal business strategy. It's ultimately what investors are looking at, as well as demands and expectations by employees, and crucially, demands by consumers. So every business needs to take on board this agenda, and it's really going to determine a company's future existence. But also there's a lot of money both needed, but also a lot of investment potential in this area. I mean, I think a recent study by the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, International Labour Organization, identified there could be a potential 50 million new jobs across the region as a result of climate change. There are jobs under threat, I think about 2.5 million jobs in the region because of potential heat stresses, changes to agricultural practices, etc. But that's compensated by a potential 22.5 million new jobs. And every million new jobs gives a potential 1% increase in GDP. So that's a lot of new jobs, a lot of new opportunities, a lot of potential for economic growth. But it's about the urgency of the situation. And it's both about the action taken by government. So one of the things that was taken forward in Glasgow, what are called NDCs, which again, where Chile has got a very good story to tell, both on the NDC, which is its nationally determined contribution to reduce emissions by 2030, and also the long-term strategy by which those targets will be implemented. So that's government policy, but it's then for business to help drive that policy, to also hold governments to account, to ensure investment is made in this agenda in the future. And business can really drive the change much faster than government can. Business can bring innovation to bear on these issues. And fundamentally, it's about connecting with people and the potential new jobs on offer, but also the new skills, the training that's going to be needed for this whole area to be developed. And so I think rather than talking about climate change, we're really talking about social and economic change and the opportunity that comes from that. Back to you, Macarena.
Thanks, Fiona. Thank you a lot. Doubtless, it is a fact that around COP26, what we have is a lot of interesting topic around zero impact, around circular economy, around goals. So thinking about that, Claudio, do you think any of this is really realistic? Do you see our private market, our private companies in Chile being able to step up to this, or government?
Absolutely, Macarena. Not only realistic, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, as I said, for the business community and for the society. And maybe a good definition of circular economy or zero impact is a commitment with the development, a commitment with the progress, with total respect of the environment. And at the end, it's a balance. It's a balance of what we know to do, to invest, to deploy project, with total respect of the environment. And let me again use an example. In Aguas, Andinas, circular economies or zero impact is biofactories. A biofactory is a factory that transforms, as I said, waste into a useful product. And that is the circular economy strategy. As I said, the perfect waste example is the residual waters. And what is new in this point? That is totally possible to produce the transformation with zero impact to the environment. And let me explain why it's zero. Because the biofactory produces biogas as a part of a process. With biogas, we can produce energy. Then we are not demanding energy from the network. We produce useful product for society. Today in Aguas Andinas, we are fertilizing around 8,000 hectares in 6 regions and metropolitan region using organic fertilizers. And let me use another little example. A couple of years ago, we had significant concerns in Santiago area. We had typhus, we have cholera. It was unthinkable to eat and green salad without concern about typhus. Today, this is not an issue in our city. We do not have concern about typhus and cholera. And that is a result of the zero impact. It's possible to transform processes. It's possible to transform the traditional way to do things. And that is the potential of transform our strategy, transform our companies, again, to use green finance to share with financial community that it's possible to have profitable strategies, it's possible to have projects, and it's possible to have significant amount of resource devoted to the climate and the people.
Thanks, Claudio. Thanks. Maybe now we could go to understand what is our local public situation. So Bernardita, what we're seeing is COP26 abroad. What we're seeing is Claudio that's telling us how private companies are pushing towards circular economy. What about the regulator? Do we have any tools? Do you have any faculties? How is it that you are helping, if any, with green finance?
Yes, Macarena, we published in 2020 a climate change strategy in the CMF because we were, we are compromised with the public and private working group that leader is the Ministry of Finance. So we published this strategy, and this strategy has many objectives to fulfill. One of them was to publish this new norm, the ESG norm, in order to get information from the firms and to be useful for investors to take their decision of investment. The other thing that we are doing in the Commission is working to have a taxonomy for sectors and products, because as Cristóbal said, we need to agree which industry and what products are going to be green in order to get the green finance. So we are working on that also with different institutions of the government and participant in this working group. And also we are have some tools to avoid greenwashing. One important tool is to have the information. This information has to be truthful, complete, timely, and comparable. But we have some tools in our law in order to sanction the firms that give or inform intentionally in wrong way the information to the public in order to get green finance when they are not green enterprises of firm. So we have some tools in terms of sanction in this situation.
Thank you, Bernardita. So maybe now going to Jennifer. Jennifer, could you share us the trends you're living in JP Morgan and around ESG? What is what you're seeing? What will come in the future?
Yeah, sure. So I think three things really. First one is climate. I know a lot of people have touched upon this point, but I think it's really important from an investment standpoint to understand that when it comes to climate change, it's more than just about looking at greenhouse gas or carbon emissions. If you think about a very big component of climate risks, it's the physical climate risks that really matter and that are not really priced in by the market. This has a variety of impact on different companies in different sectors. So it could be, risks to agriculture, as there's going to be a lot less freshwater supply, just as an example, right? So from an investment standpoint, the question that we need to ask is, what kind of exposure do we have in the portfolio to climate risks, right? And it's the entire portfolio, not just one part of the portfolio. It could be that your real estate allocation is exposed to some type of physical climate risks. It could be that your allocation to the transportation sector in fixed income, equity, alternatives are all exposed to some kind of a transition risks. So it's really important to understand that overall risk exposure and how that is going to impact your asset allocation over time. And then also, I think the other aspect of it is, like we mentioned earlier, the opportunity side. So if you're able to identify these type of risks that you're exposed to as a portfolio, then you need to understand how you can potentially mitigate those. So for example, are you able to find a replacement companies or assets that emit less emissions, but also deliver the same rate of return? Are you able to find companies like Claudio's who really focuses on regenerating or reconfiguring the way they do business such that not only they can hit the climate or environmental target, but also actually being profitable from doing so. So I think that's one key trend that we want to focus on. So there is the physical risk side of things that we need to think about, but also across the entire portfolio, the overall risk allocation. The second trend that we really think a lot about, and part of it is also driven by COVID, it's just the importance of biodiversity. We all know that biodiversity has been under threat for the last decade, and then also how that has resulted in not only just loss in species, but also threat to public health. So if we think about the likely impacts that companies may have on land, water, and species, and the kind of secondary, if you like, impact that it would have on not just the companies itself, but your entire portfolio, I think that's another area whereby there is less understanding because of how complex it is, because how integrated it is with climate change, right? If you think about it, biodiversity or nature is the largest natural sink for carbon emissions in the world. So if that is being impacted and damaged, then we have less ability to absorb carbon. So they're all very interlinked. I don't think you can tackle climate change without looking at biodiversity. I don't think you can tackle public health crisis without looking at biodiversity. So I think that's an area that from a investor standpoint, you really want to think about. And what can you do as an investor apart from viewing biodiversity as a potential risks? What is the opportunity? Like Fiona said at COP, one of the key achievement or announcement coming out of COP is this commitment to really reverse deforestation. So forestry is important, and Chile, I think, is in a very unique position from a biodiversity standpoint. The kind of investment opportunities that we can think about as investors, but also I think as a country, the contribution to fighting against global warming and climate crisis is also something that we should keep in mind. The last thing or key trend that we're very excited about is just innovation in ESG data. The fact that we now have the ability to tap into alternative data sets, so we don't only just have to rely on ESG rating or what companies disclose to us, really helps us to better assess how a company is doing against ESG issues. So using technology as part of our investment processes to tap into different kinds of data sets is also something that I'm very excited about because it really helps to reinforce our commitment to invest sustainably.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very interesting. Jennifer was talking to us, amongst many things, about a certain sector, which was forestry. So Fiona, what do you think? Are there specific sectors that we should be focusing in when we are thinking about green finance, about climate finance? Which are the specific sectors? Do you share that forestry is a very important one? Do you have other ones in mind?
Thank you. And I think the point that Jennifer has made about the interrelationships between nature, health, biodiversity, climate change is absolutely crucial. So in Glasgow, we saw 130 countries sign up to the Declaration on Forests and Land. And what is that all about? That's about the world committing to protecting and conserving over 90% of the forests across the world. And that's so important in terms of carbon mitigation to preserve those forests, but also it's about changes in land use management making the most of the current land that has been deforested and used for agricultural purposes, and looking at innovation in agriculture. And I think that is a real opportunity. I think also on this agenda, there's very interesting work being done on the economics of nature and biodiversity, and how you take nature into account in the whole value chain, both in terms of a country's economy, but also in specific sectors. And I think this is an area that's going to grow and inform future business and investment and inform future government strategies. But in terms of sectors that are going to be absolutely critical in this agenda, it's around sectors that can be decarbonised, so around transport, around manufacturing. It is about making the most of nature. It's about the forestry sector. It's about the agricultural sector. As Claudio and others have said, water is absolutely critical. I recently travelled extensively across the region, and I think my observation would be it's all about water. Water either in the wrong place at the wrong time, and either too much of it or too little of it. So looking at ways in which we can improve water access and water management, I think, is a major opportunity. Also, in all our discussions so far, we've really been talking about the land, whereas of course the whole blue economy is so important, and a great opportunity where Chile has done really leading work in its development of marine protected areas, but also as we look at the impacts of climate change in the future, understanding what that means for coastal communities. What does that mean for coastal infrastructure? And again, coming back to how we make that infrastructure more sustainable, more resilient. And that, I think, is a major opportunity in Chile and also across the region. Because the investments that are being made today in big infrastructure, whether that's roads, bridges, ports, airports, etc., that investment could be with us for the next 50 years. So we need to make sure it's the right investment. We need to make sure it's resilient against the impacts of climate change. And so finally, often that infrastructure is about either in or linking up cities. So understanding both the wider planning on smart cities, but how do you embed both risks and opportunities for climate change in your urban planning, in your city development, and also taking account ultimately again of people, the people living in those cities, the people that may want to migrate to those cities or away from those cities because of climate change. That's another important consideration, both for individual businesses, for their own risk and opportunity, but also in the wider economic agenda. And what does that mean? Both for Chile as a country, what does it mean for individual cities? What does it mean for local populations? Back to you, Macarena.
Thank you, Fiona. Thanks a lot. Very interesting what you were saying, amongst many things, about water. I think we will have to go on that to Claudia at some point. But before that, I just wanted to understand in terms of impact of investment, environmental impact. Are we investing enough, Cristóbal, in Chile? How do you see the trend? Are we going to invest more? Is that feasible? Why?
Nice question. No, we have a very little allocation to impact investments or to environmental pure investments. On the one side, there is a regulation that we follow. We are a pension fund, and we are defined by law that we can only offer 5 different funds, and every pension fund has to offer the same 5 different funds, so there's no differentiation there. But nevertheless, people is willing to allocate a portion of their monies, because we manage people's money, people's savings for retirement, and people is willing to be more engaged in what's how their money is invested, and we have listened to to many associations and a lot of people that they want to have a portion of their money invested directly on impact investment or in more environmentally friendly investments. Now, what we have talked, and this is very early conversation, is the possibility to have an additional fund, something that could be a green fund or an impact fund, whatever, a G fund or an I fund, a different fund where people could decide to allocate a portion of their money into some projects where the return is not the most important concern for the people. I'm sure that we can balance return and ESG, and Claudio, everything that Claudio has mentioned is a proof of that. But not every project is profitable as what he mentioned, or as well managed as Aguas Andinas is doing right now. So we have a role, and I think we can have a more active role in looking for more environmentally friendly projects, and we have a stewardship role to have constructive conversations with the companies, with the management, in order to explain them our concerns and our requirements regarding ESG. But at the same time, I would like to explore with the regulators the possibility to open a different fund where people could freely allocate a portion of their monies and have somehow translate that personal commitment in environmental concerns and development and climate change and impact investments into where their monies are invested.
Thank you, Cristóbal. And now going back to our friends in Zoom, Jennifer, why don't you share with us, in terms of investment, when investing and when you see potential targets, what is it that companies need to get right in terms of ESG? What is it where you're looking at, the minimum, the basics? What is the need to have?
That's a great question. So I would say, number one, as we know, the G of ESG is really important. But it's not just about how many independent directors do you have on the board. So right now, I think a bare minimum that we look at, in addition to independence of the board, the right structure in the committee, I think one key thing we look at is whether the board has enough diverse experience and background. So it's not so much about gender diversity, obviously that's important, but really looking at whether the board has people who all come from the same background, same industry, or they actually have different area of expertise. Because we just spent the last hour talking about all of these new challenges that companies need to go through. The reality is a lot of these challenges are new to management or employees in the company. So you really want to have a board that can bring different kind of resources, help, guidance for the companies to be able to really navigate the transition. I think the second thing we look at, especially around the ESG area, is the S. I talked a little bit about how human capital management is really important, right? If you think about in the old days, we do look at some of those S issues, but it's primarily looking at whether a company has a health and safety policy, what is the incident rate at a factory. Not that these are not important anymore, but they're not enough to really allow us to understand the full spectrums of what motivates people and to really encourage them to increase higher productivity. So one of the ways that we can use, in addition to really directly engage with company and ask them about, talent development program, especially in the oil and gas sectors, what are they doing with regards to reskilling and retraining their employees? We also try to source from other data sets to understand about customer satisfaction, employee sentiment, etc. I mean, the whole, I think the concept is what is likely going to be future problems that companies may have, as opposed to just focusing on historical problems they had with labor or union, etc. And then finally, on the E of ESG, I think the minimum that we're looking at really is good disclosure, like was mentioned before, good and consistent disclosure on environmental issues. So not just carbon emission, but also water consumption, waste treatment, depending on which sector that the company is in, but really, really good and consistent disclosure on environmental issue is really important to us. Of course, we can look to third-party data vendor and alternative data sources to find some of those. But what I have found is that, more and more we're spending time with companies to look at beyond, if they do good disclosure, then we can actually move the conversation to talk about innovations they have, right? Otherwise, I think you end up stuck in a conversation with company just on the basic disclosure stuff, which is not helpful to the shareholder, nor is it helpful to the company, right? So if companies can provide very good environmental level disclosures, be it using the task force on TCFD, so on financial related disclosure, or using SASB, for example, as a guide to really figure out what are the key metrics that you want to disclose, especially on the E, will really help the conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Fiona, would you help us understand how is it that companies can drive change? How is it that companies can push the change?
Okay, so I think really, as Jennifer has been outlining, a lot of this is about the choices that individual companies make. So first of all, it's about companies' own really survival in a very competitive market. And key to that success is going to be both around developing the business strategy on the risks and opportunities, but as Jennifer's been saying, making that information transparent, making it available to investors. And that is going to drive change very quickly in the economy, in society. That in turn is also going to drive and evolve government policy. So one hopes that governments across the region will create the environments that will facilitate business moving forward on this very, very important agenda. But businesses also have a role, I think, in holding governments to account, in stimulating governments to be ever more ambitious in cutting emissions and moving to net zero. And ultimately, that's going to be about business really making the most of those opportunities and creating the new jobs. Also putting pressure on government to ensure that people are skilled up to make the most of those new jobs. And also in turn, all of this drives innovation, both innovation that businesses adopt, but also innovation that businesses demand. And I mean, one example has to be for Chile, of course, in the whole mining sector, and looking at the opportunity of green mining, looking at the opportunity of decarbonisation in that sector, the use of water, the use of clean transport, remote mining operations, etc. Because what's clear in our net zero world, still the minerals are going to be very, very important for the future development of industries and economies. So making sure they're produced in the most sustainable way, as well as looking for new opportunities such as Chile is doing on the whole hydrogen energy strategy, that's also going to be very important. And so I think business has a role in gripping the opportunity, in driving change, in holding governments to account, and creating new opportunities for people, and also engaging with society to ensure those society meet both consumer demand, but also the needs of society in terms of economic development, but also in terms of quality of life for people. Back to you, Macarena.
Thank you, Fiona. So, Claudio, according to what Fiona was saying in a prior intervention, it seems to be that water is the industry to be when talking about ESG. So, and you're in particular a president of a board as well, of a board of a water company. So, so let me understand, Do you think boards are taking this enough seriously? Is this on the top of the agenda? Is this on the strategy? What we're seeing at EY is that it is becoming more and more important. However, people are demanding it to be more. So it is somehow increasing its importance, but still lagging behind. Are you seeing the same? Is it different?
Good question, Macarena. Well, my opinion around corporate governance of companies is that we need to continue transforming, improving the concept of corporate governance. And I would like to be totally clear in this point. The reason to change is not due to bad performance or bad practices. Actually, numbers support that Chilean companies and general companies are providing growth, providing wealth to society. The reason to change, in my opinion, the role of the board, the role of board directors, is that we are in a new context. We are in a new reality. And maybe different companies are changing the paradigm of your business concept. And again, I think this is a significant opportunity to present to our communities, to our group of interest, as a very active entity with the capability to adapt our strategies. Let me use one of my conclusions around COP26 is a reality that for governments and states, it's been difficult to get some target around decarbonization of the planet. In my opinion, that is a responsibility for the business community, for enterprises to support a very important transformation of our reality, the climate reality. And at the end, that is the role of a board, to help management, to help business community around a company to transform the way to think the business. And I think at the end, in a very practice term, this maybe should demand new skills for boards. We were discussing before this pandemic around the digital skills for a board member. Maybe today we need to continue complementing the role with skills, let me use the word, more citizen skills, people more connected with society. As we are discussing in this panel, more environmental skills to do the right questions around the strategy. Then I think, again, we have a significant role here around boards and corporate governance. And maybe, and let me end with this comment, maybe it's a very significant question that future generation will do to us. What did you do to leave us a better planet? And that is exactly the role of a board, to do the right question, to support the strategies with right decisions around how to transform our business activity, our purpose, to be compatible with the environment. That is the opportunity.
Thanks, Claudio. Thanks. And Bernardita, we're going to have in the future a regulation asking us companies to disclose ESG matters. Do you think this will be practical? Do you think it will produce impact? In the past, we have had other regulations requiring a disclosure, which have not necessarily been that impactful. So do you think this one is going to make a change?
Well, I will ask this answer that is a one step, but we need a lot of other factors in order to get these virtuous cycles where enterprises or firms and investors demand information, ESG information, in order to make better decisions. So this new norm I think, is a very important step. It's not the only what we need. And because it's important, because the information has to be approved by the board. As Claudio says, the board is the highest level of decision in the firm. So if the board are aware of the impact that the firm produce on the environment and the society is the first step in order to get to do the things in the way that to protect the environment. And yet, at the end of the day, the firms need to survive, needs to be sustainable. So it's in their own interest to respect and to be friendly with environment and society. And also the board, we need a diversity in the board, because the problems that firms, people are going to face in the future are very complex. So different visions and knowledge could be useful for the enterprise in order to adapt to this new world, this new environment, this new society. That's why diversity is very important for the board. Not to check a box in order I'm comply with the regulation or what the society wish, but it's because it's in the interest of firm to be there, to be faced, to be there to and to face those challenges in order to survive. So I think this is a very important step, but it's not the silver bullet, but it's a process, and we need the help of everyone in order to get this more friendly financial environment.
Thank you, Bernardita. So what we're seeing is that we're going to have this new regulation, and Bernardita shares that from her perspective, it's a first step. So how is it that this first step's going to hit you and the world of private investors, Cristóbal? What do you see? How is this going to impact the investment process?
I think it's all aligned in the same direction. It's something that we as private investors have been doing, and I'm talking as the community of investors, not as a pension fund, but the whole community has been worried about ESG for several years, and I think that what CMF is doing right now is going in the same direction, is giving us tools in order to have better information, to better analyze companies, because the investment decisions that we are able to do are as good as the information that we have. So I think this new norm is going to provide us with a lot of good information, but as I mentioned before, it's a work in progress, and I think we need to have open communication channels in order for us to provide them our feedback in what we see and what we also need. So I think we are going, we're walking the right steps, but we need to keep this communication open.
Thank you, Cristóbal. Well, as much as I would like to continue speaking with you and with our panelists for long, truth being said is that we are ending our time here, and we need to close this panel. So before saying goodbye, I would only like to say thanks again to our panelists. From abroad, Jennifer Wu, thank you, Jennifer. Fiona Calder, thank you, Fiona. And here from our local community, Claudio Muñoz, Bernardita Piedrabuena, Cristóbal Torres. It was really interesting to hear from all of you. Thank you, and I hope you continue joining in this Chile Day events, and I hope we can see each other in person when COVID is left behind. Thanks a lot.